fight tough.
Hello everybody, welcome back to Mondays with Mover. I'm Mover. We've got an exciting episode interview today with Casmo, who you may know from his channel, which the link's in the description. He does helicopters, which we haven't had a helicopter guest yet, so I'm very excited. So first, sorry I was hot mic. I figured that would happen. Hopefully you can hear me now. I'm looking at the chat. But we're going to try something a little different today. Instead of just having the side-by-side view, it's going to be the speaker view. I don't know if that works better or not. Let me know. But we're excited to hear Casmo's story. And let's get started here. Right. Meow. Hello, Casmo.
Hello. What's going on? How are you?
Yeah. We're already half the battle.
All right. It's working.
Yeah, people are like, hey, sound is good. When people say sound is good, that's a good thing. You know. So let's start from the beginning. Where do we find your podcast? What is your podcast? What is your YouTube channel? What do you do? What would you say you do here?
Well, a little bit of everything and none of it good. So the podcast is called the Low Level Hell Podcast. You can find it anywhere that your fine podcasts are sold. You can check out our website, www.thelowlevelhellpodcast.com. And so it's got links to all those places. And then my YouTube channel is called CasmoTV. It's CASMO TV. And yeah, it's mostly DCS helicopter. I dabble in fixed wing as well, but yeah, that's my channel.
That is exactly how I found you. There are some awesome videos on that channel. Kiowa stuff. I guess you're in testing development with that, and there was some JTAC stuff that I saw was pretty cool.
Yeah, I've always secretly dreamed of being a JTAC. I just think it's cool. Like I love the whole like thing, and we got to kind of like as a Kiowa guy, you got to kind of do that job a little bit. You know, not legally, but you could definitely do some call-in. So yeah, I like that stuff.
Awesome. Well, let's get right into it. What got you into aviation? So you've flown Kiowas and Apaches. We'll get that out the way first. But your career is actually not linear like most people here. So how did you get into aviation, and then how did you get into helicopters?
Yeah, it's weird. I guess a child of the '80s, right? So Top Gun came out when I was third grade or something. So of course, you want to do that. I grew up around MacDill Air Force Base, which is a big F-16 base, so see them all the time. But life just kind of took me into the Army. And when I came in the Army, I don't know why, but I never really thought about flying for the Army. I wanted to be in the infantry, which if anyone knows me knows that is not what I'm built for. Like I don't like to get up early, and I don't like to carry heavy things.
Army training, sir.
Yeah, so it just seemed natural. Like, oh, that's what you do. And just as a funny aside, when I was a cadet going into my last year, we had this branch orientation thing, and they have all the equipment out from all the branches, and they're like, you could look around. And they took us over to the armor spot where the tanks were and stuff. And I guess maybe I looked disinterested. I don't know. But this sergeant walks over to me, and he's like, "What do you want to do, cadet?" And I said, "Well, I want to be in the infantry." And the look on his face was just this sadness just crossed over his face. And he just goes, why carry your weapon when your weapon can carry you? And it was like the proverbial light switch had gone off in my head. And I was like, that's the wisest thing I've ever heard in my entire life. So from then on, I was all in that. Yes, I want to ride around in tanks. So when I came into the Army, that's what I did, and was a tank guy for a while. And then did some mortars, motorized mortars, essentially part of the tank battalion. But always in the back of my head was, I still want to fly. I just never really thought about it. And so luckily enough, I was at Fort Knox, Kentucky. I was a 24-year-old company commander, just dealing with Joe problems, right? So just, this guy didn't pay his alimony. This guy was speeding, just all this stuff. And I was like, man, I'm just too young to feel this old. I'm just dealing with stuff, and I'm not doing what I want to do, which is, blow stuff up and do all this, fun stuff. The war had just kicked off in Iraq, and by chance, I met these aviators. One was a retired Cobra guy, and one was an active duty Apache guy. And just talking with them, and one of them said, well, why don't you just branch transfer over? And I'd never like thought about it. Like, oh, I didn't know you could do that. Long story short, what I ended up doing was resigning my commission. So I was an Army captain, and I just resigned and became a warrant officer. Which, if you look at the chart, is like 9 or like 7 ranks below that. It was like a huge move. I had some of my bosses like, oh, are you sure you want to do this? And I was like, yeah, this would be awesome. So it was a little bit of a pay cut. But that is essentially how I got into aviation. So I showed up to Fort Rucker as a captain and walked into a building and walked out the building the same day as a warrant officer 1 and reported into flight school. So yeah.
Wow. So that is, I mean, when you do that, it's a pay cut, but also, did you become a unicorn? Because I've always heard warrant officers are very hard to find and very hard to know about. Is that
yeah? Well,
true
it's the
statement?
CW5s that are the unicorns. You hear about them, but you never quite see them. But W1s are kind of like privates in aviation. They're all over the place.
Yeah. So you had no, like, as a kid growing up, you had no aviation experience. You weren't interested in flying up to that point until, basically you're driving a tank around and they said, hey, why don't you try this?
Well, not quite. So when I was in, before I went into high school, I was in Civil Air Patrol. So I was all in on that. And then when I was in high school, I went to Air Force Junior ROTC. So, I was interested in it, but as far as like my family, no. In fact, I had more association with armor. So my grandfather was a Sherman gunner in World War II, fought in Africa and Italy and stuff. So that was kind of my background. My dad was a sailor, but yeah, no flying in our family.
Well, where'd you go to, so you were an officer, where'd you go to college? I mean, what'd you major in and
Yeah.
all of that? I mean,
Yeah, so that's that's probably the other part of the story of why I never got to fly anything faster is, I really didn't take grades seriously in high school, to be quite frank. So that's my advice to people is study hard in school. But I was getting turned down by a lot of colleges coming out of high school. And suddenly I get this letter from this place called Georgia Military College, which was an early commissioning program. And they said, you can come here and get commissioned in 2 years instead of 4. Yeah. So I was 19 years old when I pinned on second lieutenant rank.
what?
Yeah. It's silly,
Holy
right? It
crap.
makes no sense. So I was a tank platoon leader so it's kind of a weird system. You finish, but you still have 2 years of college to finish up, but you're commissioned. And so you typically would join the Guard or Reserve to kind of do some time. But I joined the South Carolina Guard after Georgia Military College and was a tank platoon leader there. And then at the same time, I was a full-time student at the University of Central Florida. So,
Wow.
yeah.
So did you get to drive the tanks?
Yeah. Particularly when you go through, officer training it's nothing but lieutenants and you're doing tank stuff. So you'll kind of rotate through and you're the driver and you're the gunner and kind of all that good stuff. But yeah, driving, I mean, if you like go-karts, a tank is a 70-ton go-kart. It's amazing. It's so much fun.
Nice.
Yeah, it's a blast.
That's awesome. So why did you have to resign your commission? Would they not allow you as a captain to go through to transition?
You can. It's pretty selective. And I think that year so that was kind of the long part of the story is I did put in for a branch transfer to go over from captain to captain in aviation branch, and I didn't get picked up. And they only do the board every 6 months, I think. And they only picked I think 2 people that year or that board period. And they told me look, you have a really strong packet, just put it in next time and maybe you'll see. Well, next time's in 6 months. I want to do this now. Right. So I'm already
Yeah.
excited. And funny enough, the Apache guy that I met was a warrant officer, and he even suggested, he was like, well, why don't you just resign your commission? And I was like, oh, that's silly. Why would anyone do that? And now I'm faced with this conundrum. And, at the time we didn't have kids. So yes, it was a pay cut, but it was it's not that huge of a deal if that's what you want to do. So, but yeah, that was the easy button, I guess you could say.
So where did you go to flight school?
So the Army's flight school is down at Fort Rucker in Lower Alabama, around Dothan area, if anyone knows where that's at. But yeah, so that's where all the Army pilots active duty go through. And then the Guard has got some other locations, but I think they all go through primary and basic training there. And then there's got some other outstations for the Guard, but for active duty, it was all right there at Fort Rucker. Took about a year.
So what'd you start out? What do you start out flying Army aviation, like helicopter wise?
Um, Well, when I went through, it was called the TH-67, which is essentially a Bell 206, just painted differently, which I think is what the Navy and Air Force, I think, was also starting with. Essentially, they just had different names for it. And so you do that for primary, and of course things have changed obviously since I've gone through, but you'll start off with that aircraft. Now they've got what's called the Lakota LUH. It's a
Yeah.
UH-72, I think, which is a little bit fancier aircraft than what we grew up with. But you'll do that for, several months, 6 months, I think, something around there. And then you'll get boarded for, whatever advanced aircraft.
So flying that, essentially, since your first aircraft was the 58, was it pretty easy transition? And I mean,
Oh,
how
yeah.
long did it take you to pick up just basic helicopter flying? Was it tough, or was it one of those things that like you just naturally got it?
You're talking about just initially first time flying?
Yeah, yeah, just
Yeah.
first time flying a helicopter. What was that like?
Yeah, terrifying. It really was. I mean, I'd only ridden in the back of a Chinook one time as a cadet, and watched the senior sergeant throw up all over himself. So that was my, helicopter experience. And but the funny thing about, and this because you do some helicopter stuff, but hovering is hard. Like we were talking about before, like that's the hard thing. And I remember like the third day of training, and the instructor pilot's like, okay, we're gonna do autos today. And I'm sure the look on my face was pure terror, because I said, we don't even know how to land yet. And he said, well, it's easier than landing. And I was like, oh my gosh, okay. So yeah, I mean, as finding, as we call it, finding the hover button is hard, and it takes some time, but it's just one of those things that, you just got to keep doing it. But and then transitioning from that to the Kiowa, because it was essentially the same aircraft, just upgraded, but a lot of the limitations were the exact same. And so I'm sure it's the same in the fighter community. You got to, there's certain things you got to have memorized 100%. That made
Yeah.
it a lot easier, because you were just like, oh, I've been studying that for 6 months already, so I'm good.
So what is the process for, I guess track select is what we call it in the Air Force, but
Yeah.
how do they rack and stack you? Is it just based on where you are in the class, and then at that point what they have available, and then you kind of pick from there? There's
Yeah.
fixed wing as well, right? You.
So I think now you can basically track straight into fixed wing. When I went through, that was a unicorn. Like I think every now and then you might have something like that happen. But yeah, it was typically just your OML, your order of merit list, and that was based off your grades, your PT test, and all kinds of random stuff that they put on you.
PT
Um,
test. Wow.
yeah, it was actually a pretty large part of the score, which I found strange, but Army. Um, but yeah, so when I went through, it was very low key. Like they basically just brought you into a room, and they had a list of what was available, and they're like, okay, we're gonna go down the list. You've got 6 Blackhawks, 3 Kiowas, 2 Apaches, 3 Chinooks. Bill, you're first. What do you want? And they just kind of went down the list. Now I think there's a lot of showmanship about it and stuff, but it's still based off the OML from what I understand. Um, as to what's available, it's really just a crapshoot. It's and when you go through school, and I think it's probably the same in the fixed wing community too. You hear these stories about like, well, your class is going to be all Blackhawks. Like they only have Blackhawk slots. So and everyone's either sad or excited because of that. Um, but yeah, it's just needs of the Army at that point. You're going to see what's available.
Wow. And so this is about the time OIF is kicking off, Iraqi Freedom.
Yeah, I was in flight school, and I started in August or September of '03, and
Wow. So,
graduated a year later. So yeah.
so you transitioned to the 58 knowing this is real. I mean, I'm going
Yeah.
straight
Yeah,
out
it was
there.
game on. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I deployed, I guess, about 2 years after I got out of flight school. Yeah.
Wow. So 58 training, I mean, is it pretty, this is the later model, right? With the bubble on top and everything. I mean,
Yeah,
this
that's
is,
right. Yeah, the Delta model. So the Kiowa Warrior. I know you've flown an OH-58, which we would call like the Alpha Chuck. So that was old, just kind of I don't want to say run of the mill, but just a scout platform. Whereas the Delta came about in the '80s, and that's where they put the big ball on top, which is called the mass mounted sight. and then late 80s, early 90s is when they weaponized it, if you will, and turned it into the Kiowa Warrior. So it could carry a mixture of rockets, 50 caliber, or Hellfire. It just kind of strap on different things based on weight and allowances. Didn't carry much. It's too light to fight and too slow to run. But you're typically flying around with maybe one Hellfire and 4 rockets and a can-do attitude. And that's about it. So.
Well, in the documentary Firebirds, there's a Stinger, so
Yeah,
and you can use that shoulder launched if you need to.
Yeah, I mean, it's a Shakespearean tale, old Firebirds, but yeah, we actually, I think they stopped carrying those like right before I went through flight school. That wasn't even trained anymore. Yeah.
Wow. So your first assignment, where'd you go after 58 school?
Yeah, so I went to the 82nd Airborne Division, America's Guard of Honor, here at lovely Fort Bragg, which is where I'm at right now. Yeah, so I went there to what was at the time an attack battalion, which seems kind of silly that OH-58 Delta unit was an attack battalion, but then we reflagged to a cavalry squadron. And but yeah, I got there in end of 04 and stayed at Bragg until 2011. So I deployed twice there.
Wow. So that whole setup, I mean, so you're with the 82nd Airborne. I mean, you're just part ground pounders, aviation, it's all kind of just mixed in?
Yeah, so for the Army, you'll have a aviation brigade, which I don't really know the good equation for like the Air Force side of things. I guess probably like a group or something. It's run by a full bird. But you've got probably 100 aircraft because you've got the Cav squadron, you've got the attack battalion, you've got the assault battalion, so that's the Blackhawks, and then you've got the general support battalion, so that's gonna be Blackhawks, Chinooks. So yeah, it's a ton of aircraft, but that brigade is part of the division, which is run by a 2-star, and then the division will have like 3 or 4, depends on what year it is essentially, but 3 or 4 infantry brigades, some artillery, a whole bunch of stuff. But yeah, you're a part of that, and they'll kind of slice you out, and depending on the deployment cycle. So
do they leave you alone, or are you like doing PT with them and doing all the grunt stuff while you're also flying?
Oh yeah, you get left alone. I mean, we had our own airfield essentially, Simmons Army Airfield, which is kind of away from the main part of Fort Bragg. And yeah, you kind of do your own thing. I mean, you'd still get up early and do PT and stuff, but it wasn't like those guys are, they're jumping into an LZ and then marching out for 25 miles. We ain't doing that stuff. You would have guys jump there. And when I showed up at the 82nd, I asked like, hey, excuse me, should I go to airborne school? And they're like, be smart, don't start. Because once you start on the road of jumping, and then a guy in my unit jumped and broke like his femur and didn't fly for like 8 months,
Oof.
And so, this mentality of like, well, I want to go jump. And I eventually did go jump much, much later and got my 5 jumps and qualified. And I was like, yeah, no, I'm good. I don't want to do that anymore. That's just too much. But yeah, you weren't really required to do those kind of things.
Going back to the tank thing, had you deployed on the ground previously, or was the helicopter your first deployment?
Yeah, that was the first one. When I was most of my armor time was in the Guard. In fact, all of my on-tank time was in the Guard. When I came on active duty, I went to Korea, and that's when I was a Mortar Platoon Leader. And I was there. In fact, I had just come back from my mid-tour leave, and then like 2 days later was September 11th. And so we thought we were going to deploy because, we were pretty close to Afghanistan. And we had well, you've probably heard of General Honore. I know he's back in the news lately, but he was our division commander, and he was a very excited dude and liked to get into it. So we were fully expecting that he was pounding on somebody's table like, hey, deploy us, we're ready. But yeah, no, I'd never, other than just going to Korea, I'd never deployed anywhere.
Yeah. So talk to me about your first deployment. I mean, how do they get, just logistically, how do they get the helicopters there? Are they just throw them in the back of a couple C5s, or?
Well, we fly across the ocean with them. It's no big deal. No. I talked to an Osprey guy one time and he said they do that. And I was like, nope, I can't even imagine that.
Oh
yeah.
God,
They like have an internal
way.
bay of fuel or something. I was like, no, I'm good.
No.
Yeah, we typically ship them, just we would fly them down to Charleston and they would dense pack them onto a boat. And then depending on how rapidly you needed to get stuff somewhere, you could put a few on a, different aircraft. So that was kind of the cool thing about being at the 82nd is we had a very different role from any other Kiowa unit in that, the 82nd is designed to jump in and seize stuff, right? So it's seize an airfield or something. So we had special landing gear on our 58s where it could, what we call, squat it. So it wasn't like this normal kind of rolling landing gear. There's this weird structure that it could just squat right down. And so the belly of the aircraft would be right down near the ground. And they could attach this little crane to the side of the aircraft and pull the MMS off. You could fold the blades, but we would push these things into a C-130. You could fit 2 of them in a C-130. And so the idea was that they would jump in, seize an airfield, C-130 would come rolling in 20 minutes later. We would roll off the back, and then 15, 20 minutes later, we were up in the air doing our job.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So we would practice that, and that was a lot of fun. Just kind of doing all that stuff. But to get them overseas, typically we would ship them, but you could fit, gosh, now I'm going to be a liar, but I think like 8 or 9 at least onto a C-17 because they're just so small. I mean, they're really small aircraft.
So. Wow. So you went to Iraq. It was this 2003, 4-ish time frame.
2006 is when I got to Iraq. Yeah.
So things are still pretty. I mean, this is Fallujah time frame, right?
It was right before the surge. Yeah, the big surge.
So tell me about that. Like, what kind of missions were you doing? What was the feeling in theater? How did you deal with that?
Yeah, so so our squadron was 30 aircraft, split into 3 troops of 10. And so we all ship into Kuwait, get everything ready to go, and then we fly north. And they basically split us up. So we had a troop in Talafar up north. My troop went to Mosul, and then we had another troop down south. I can't remember where they were at. And essentially, you were like a beat cop. I mean, that's the best way to describe it. You were just flying around the city, particularly something like Mosul, which is, a pretty good sized city. I think like 1.5 million people there. And you were just flying around looking for trouble. There was an infantry brigade on the ground, and they were constantly doing their patrols and stuff. And so you would, keep an eye out for them and do deliberate things with them. And then plus we had the special operations guys in town. So there was special forces dudes and there was rangers. And so they'd do these raids, late at night. And, we would coordinate with them and be their cover for that. And, get to talk to fixed wing every now and then. They'd come overhead and, they'd see something with their pod or vice versa. And we'd kind of work together. But yeah, that was essentially it. Just long days. I mean, we would do, a 12-hour day, and you'd probably fly 6 or 7 hours sometimes, just flying around waiting for something to happen.
That's you must have back problems now from sitting in a helicopter for 7 hours a day.
Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunately the design of a helicopter to help you survive a crash also makes it incredibly uncomfortable. So yeah, it's a lot of guys have back problems. It's true.
So the aircraft itself, we talked about, my only experience being the earlier 58s, but is it still 4 seats, and do you have like a dedicated sensor operator, or like how does that work? And
yeah, it's a 2-seat. All the back seats are filled up with giant boxes that probably your cell phone can do right now, like just these massive, 1980s.
The computers, technology. The punch cards and everything.
Yeah, exactly. What got us to the moon the first time. So all that's filled up in the back. So you've got the 2 guys in the front. Both of them can fly. They've got, controls, but they have different cyclics. So the left seater is the guy who's running the sensor. He's the only guy who can really move the sensor around. He can squirt the laser. The guy in the right seat is the only one that can shoot. So when you're shooting something like a Hellfire, or you're trying to use the sensor to help you shoot the rockets, which is kind of rare, then you'd have to work together. But the guy is flying you around, and you're down on the sensor looking around, or he's doing something really dynamic and kind of zipping and zooming, and you're just kind of along for the ride, cheering him on. We also carried our M4s up on the dashboard, and that was also a tool that we used quite a bit. I mean, the left seater pull his rifle out and shoot at dudes or do warning shots or something like that. Yeah, it's not as hard as it sounds. Like, it sounds like that's got to be insane. Like, it's actually
just sounds easy. Badass. It's popping off rounds. I mean, that's up close and personal compared to some of the stuff a fighter would do.
Yeah, and you can stop things. Just pull your rifle out and point. I remember pointing at a dude one time and then shaking my finger at him at the same time, and he got the message. Like, all right, I'm gonna stop what I'm doing right now. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. So you said there are two pilots. What didn't it used to be an enlisted guy, like a forward observer or whatever? Did that change
Yeah.
doctrinally?
Yeah. When I don't know if they did it with the old Delta models. I'm not sure how they did that when they just had the sight on top. But yeah, I think the older models, like you're talking about the Alpha Chuck, they would have the AO aerial observer. It was like an enlisted guy, and I think they would actually get a little bit of flight training, if I'm not mistaken, just a tiny bit, because
Yeah.
the problem with single pilot is your single point of failure. So if something happens, and you're with them, like, well, I guess I'm going in. There's nothing I can do. So you want to have that guy have a little bit of training or something. What was cool about the Kiowa is you could fly it single pilot even as a Kiowa warrior. You wouldn't do it operationally or anything, but we would take like JTACs and Soldier of the Month, stuff like that, and we're like, hey, we'll take them on a ride. So we would take guys around and fly them, and I would always do that. Like as soon as I took off, I would kind of give them an orientation of the controls, for one, for fun, but two, like, hey, if something happens to me, at least you have a fighting chance to get us home safe. Otherwise, you're just going to sit there and watch the ground come up. We had a guy in flight school, right? The class before mine, two new students, like brand new. I don't even think they'd soloed yet. And they were with the instructor pilot flying cross country, and they hit I don't know, like a turkey vulture or something. Went right through the windshield, hit the IP in the face, knocked him out, broke his jaw,
Oh
and he
God.
collapsed on top of the controls. Well, the kid in the back like reaches forward and pulls him off of the controls, and the other guy flies him home. So you're always kind of thinking things like that through. So yeah, you want to make sure the other guy's got at least some concept.
Wow. Yeah, that's intense. So were you staying in like a FARP, or I mean tent city kind of deal when you were
Oh
there, or was it more of a
no, we're
a
not
base?
heathens. No.
Well, it is the army,
Yeah. Well,
so
I know everyone
I
thinks
mean,
yeah.
I'm looking for stars on the hotel. What are we
Oh, I know
talking? How
you
many
are.
stars?
Yeah. No, we no, I mean, aviation, we can live pretty garbage, but it's short term. But deployed, yeah, so Missoula had an international airport, which I saw a couple years ago is completely gone, thanks ISIS. But we stayed at this airfield. It had what's called CHUs, containerized housing units or something. It's basically a shipping container that they turn into a house, and it's got a little AC in it and stuff. But we'd stay in those, and we had our own little section of the airfield blocked off, and had our aircraft parked there. It was kind of cool in Missoula because there wasn't a whole lot there. So FOB Diamondback is what it was called, and it was really a logistics node. In fact, it was called LSA Diamondback to be technical, logistics support area. And so it had a hospital and it had all this logistics stuff, and then it had these 10 Kiowas. And so it was kind of like rock star status. Like, it was really cool. You'd go into the chow hall and everyone kind of knew who you were because you were the guy in the flight suits. And the ATC guys, we're always joking with them. We'd have funny jokes on the radio and stuff because it was your house essentially, right? Missoula was
Yeah.
your playground, and other aircraft would come in, but it was your place. So yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Did you get to know like the dudes on the ground since you're kind of with them that you're supporting, or
Yeah.
is it just, hey, here's your tasking, go hang out, come back, next tasking? I mean, did you know any of them personally?
Yeah, I think it's certainly on my second deployment when we went to Afghanistan, we got to know guys a little bit better because it was kind of the same setup, but we were on this much smaller fob. But yeah, Diamondback, particularly the Ranger guys, just because we did a lot more deliberate stuff with them. So we go over to their big compound and they had all kind of crazy stuff set up, and then the SF guys would come over and chat with us. So yeah, I mean, you definitely get that personal touch. Doing what we do because you're just so close to everybody on the ground.
So I played Longbow as a kid, so I'm very familiar with this. But could you
Sure.
really hide behind the mountain and put the thing up there and kind of wait for the hind to show up? Is that a real thing?
Yeah, it was Stoller, I think, in the Scorpion attack helicopter that we were looking for. But yeah, I mean, that's totally a we got to do that we got to talk about Firebirds. But yeah, that is certainly a technique with the Kiowa, but not in Iraq and Afghanistan. It's just not the right environment. You're not looking for what you're looking for because all those aircraft were really designed for that, Russian horde pouring
Hmm.
across the
Fold
Fulda
the
Gap type
gap.
stuff,
Yeah.
right? And so how are you going to fight that? Well, yeah, you're gonna let them come to you, and you're going to lob missiles and stuff at them. And so that's what that aircraft was really designed to do. In fact, the original concept of the 58 with the mass mounted sight came from the artillery branch. Like, they're the ones that wanted an aerial observer that could, transmit them information and stuff. The 58's really got a very interesting history. It was the first, I want to say the very first glass cockpit aircraft. I know it was in the Army,
Wow.
but it was all glass cockpit. And a lot of the technology that they sort of tested with it translated to all the other aircraft in the Army inventory, at least. So, but yeah, that's kind of Cold War,
Did
strategy.
when you were back home, did you train to both scenarios, or did you just train to the counterinsurgency, Iraq,
Right.
Afghanistan kind of stuff? I mean, was it kind of both, or what were you focused on?
It was mostly the coin stuff, just because back then we were still learning it, right? And we knew that there was really no end in sight to it. So yeah, I would say a majority of our stuff. We would occasionally try to do something very deliberate. It's like, okay, this team's going to launch 10 minutes before this team, and you're going to eliminate this ZSU location, and you're going to come in and find targets and call in the A10s and things like that. But yeah, typically it was just straight up how to find dudes running around, you know, in
So
the
looking
woods.
for IEDs and stuff like. I watched your. By the way, if you haven't seen his channel, he's got some awesome DCS videos. You have a video where you and a buddy go out and you actually do some of this stuff, right?
Yeah, Barrett, who's probably watching and probably going to heckle me during the questions, but yeah, he's a tremendous Kiowa pilot experience, like 5,000 hour aviator.
Wow.
And we deployed together in Afghanistan as well. But yeah, we did a little video kind of showing, I guess, the day in the life, because I think um, a lot of people just don't understand, because again, all they have is Firebirds, so they don't have any sort of concept of how helicopters operate. And so yeah, we kind of threw this video together and kind of showed that was very typical of what we would do training wise. You just fly around Fort Bragg and oh, there's some cows. Well, they look like infantry to me, and then you start acting like they're bad guys, and you're maneuvering and doing all this stuff. So yeah, that was pretty typical.
So when you were deployed in on either location, was it like a two ship or section tactics where you go out as a two ship like you did in the video, and one's looking, one's kind of playing decoy, stuff like that, or are you single ship a lot?
No, yeah, it's never a single ship. It's always at least two. The only time I've ever done anything where it was like a three was if we would did like we would do these deliberate ops with the SAS, the Australian SAS in Afghanistan. And so it was kind of this package deal of like, two Kiowas, and Apache, and four or whatever Black Hawks to drop the operators off. But other than that, yeah, it was always a two ship. And yeah, there's kind of roles that get assigned. It's like, okay, you're lead, so the left seater is probably going to do something, and he's going to talk to this guy on the radio, and the left seater in the back aircraft, he's going to talk on this radio, and things just get divvied up so that everyone's got somebody to talk to. Because I know, like, in the fighter pilot community, you guys like being single pilot. There's always jokes about, I don't want a dude riding in the back. The problem with the helicopter, man, there's just so much going on, and
Yeah.
I mean, arguably I have flown single pilot, you know what I mean? Like, there's a guy
Yeah.
who's just not switched on, and he's kind of behind the aircraft, and it's hard work to do all that stuff by yourself. So
But it's hard to just fly it without taking your, because I mean, now granted I'm new, but with collective, it's not like a
yeah.
fighter where you just take your hands off and it's still flying. You take your hands off a helicopter and
Yeah, it wants to beat itself to death, especially the Kiowa. I mean, you could do some things like put some force trim on it and stuff, but typically guys didn't fly that way. The Apache, however, is pretty advanced, and it's got some things that'll keep you in the air. You can sit back there and take your hands off pretty easily. Yeah.
so how long did you fly the Kiowa? You flew a whole bunch of hours, right, before you transitioned?
Yeah, I wouldn't say a whole bunch of hours, but I stopped flying in 2011 because I went to a non-flying job. I was teaching, and while I was there is when the Army announced that they were getting rid of it. Because the thing with the Kiowa was always meant to be just an interim aircraft. It was a stopgap measure between like the Vietnam era to the Comanche, if you've ever heard of the Comanche, which was the world's first stealth helicopter or whatever. So when I was going through flight school, we were told like, oh, you guys will be back here in like 2 years and you'll get the Comanche transition. And then about 3 weeks later, like, oh, never mind, the Army just canceled it. You guys are flying Kiowas forever. And then you would always get these rumors of like, oh, you guys are going to fly Little Birds, or oh, you guys are going to fly this new Kiowa that Bell was coming up with, the Foxtrot model. Excuse me. And so, but eventually all that money kind of dried up, and then you got to pay attention to what else was going on. UAVs, right? So UAVs were becoming a real big thing. And the Army was looking at, okay, well, how do we do this manned unmanned teaming is what you'll hear about all the time. So a lot of money got pumped into UAVs. A lot of money got pumped into the Apache, which did need it to upgrade some things. And so you ended up with the Echo model Apache that could do all this stuff with UAVs. And so the decision was made to get rid of the Kiowa. So yeah, so I flew about 1,700 hours in the Kiowa. I guess about 1,000 of that was in combat with the 2 tours that I did. So
could you throw dudes on the skids and do high speed stuff with any of the snake eaters, or is that pretty much limited?
So yes and no. So you weren't meant to, like, it's not in the book like, oh, this is a technique. But it certainly happened. Every deployment I ever went on as a Kiowa guy, somebody got shot down and got picked up in that manner.
Holy shit, really?
Yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah.
Like one of your guys got shot down?
Well, in Iraq, yeah, some guys I know got shot down. I can't remember what happened. They didn't crash, but they had to land immediately in Mosul, and they jumped on the skids of their wingman, flew them back, and then they jumped in another aircraft and came back out. Like, it was pretty awesome.
Holy crap.
And then in Afghanistan, a CSAR Air Force aircraft, I guess they landed to pick up some casualties and then got shot up on the ground, and they couldn't take back off. And so for whatever reason, I don't remember the details, but the Kiowas landed and picked the crew up and took them out. So yeah, it happened. But to your point of like, special guys riding on the skids, when I was in Mosul, one day somebody knocks on my door. I wasn't on shift yet. And they were like, hey, you need to come in an hour earlier or later. I can't remember what it was. And I was like, what's going on? And they said, well, if you guys pull this off, you're going to be on CNN. I was like, okay, like, I don't know if I want to hear that. So we came in, and it turns out what had happened was a U.S. soldier had been captured by Al-Qaeda a couple months prior or something. And they thought they had found this guy, and he was outside Mosul, out in this little village or something. And the problem, again, kind of go back to what I was saying earlier, there was no one else really in Mosul except us and like 2 medevac Blackhawks. Well, you can't use the medevac Blackhawks to do air assaults because they're medevac, right? It's the Geneva Convention and all that stuff. And so the Ranger Battalion wanted to get out there, and the only thing they could think of doing was riding on our skids like Little Birds. And so I guess whatever approval had happened, and they were going to do this. And so they were trying to figure out on our team, like, how many, if they dropped all the weapons, because I mean, we can't carry much because it's such a light aircraft, how many Rangers could we carry on the skids? And so we were going to fly, my team was going to fly out with like 4 Rangers or something, like this very small amount. And they were going to land, we were going to land them somewhere. And then there was a convoy coming in, and there was an AC-130 overhead. But I guess at the last second, they finally talked the medevac guys into just like painting over their red crosses and just be regular Blackhawks. and they flew out there that way. And unfortunately, it turned up to be a dry hole. The guy wasn't there anyway, but yeah. So I guess in extremis, sure, you could absolutely do it.
Does the D have an upgraded engine over the earlier models? I mean, is it more of a hot rod, or are you kind of power limited?
Yeah, it's power limited, but a lot of it has more to do with like the transmission. And I'm not super smart on engines and stuff, but I know that we lost some horsepower with the transmission. And then of course, like anything in the military, they just like to add weight to it, right? So, you're talking about an aircraft whose max gross weight is 5,200 pounds. Well, I weigh 250 with all my body armor and stuff, and the other guy weighs the same, and now you strap on 100-pound missile and a couple 33-pound rockets. The weight adds up real quick, so there's just not a lot of room. But particularly like in Afghanistan, I was up in the mountains. It wasn't uncommon to just kind of be skipping down the runway, trying to get up speed, or sometimes coming out of the parking, because we'd have these barricades to protect the aircraft in case you got mortared or something. And the aircraft would already be armed up. You couldn't even get out of parking because you couldn't pick it up to a hover to get out. So you'd have the crew chiefs come over and be like, "Hey, take this missile off. I'm going to back out, put the missile back on, and then I'm going to go," because you just couldn't get enough airflow. Yeah, it was ridiculous.
Wow. Wow. So, I mean, you said it didn't have air conditioning. So were the doors off the whole time?
Yeah. Yeah. We flew with the doors off, which, sometimes became a machismo thing, because when it got really cold, guys also kept the doors off, and you were like a coward if you want to put your doors on. And I'm like, man, I'm cold, I'm putting the doors on.
But it's speed limited though, right? With the doors off. So you lose a little bit of capability from that.
Well, yeah, I mean, speed is relative, right? So we didn't need to go fast, because typically you didn't have to go far, right? Because there's Army helicopters deployed everywhere, right? So the farthest I need to go is probably 50 miles. Okay, that's not bad. And yeah, I want to say, it's been forever, but I want to say we were like limited to 110 knots with the doors off, and max V&E was like 125 with them on. So yeah, you were losing a little bit, but I had my M4. I could throw smoke grenades to mark stuff if I had to, and just the visibility, because those doors suck. I mean, you barely see out of them, and I'm really tall. I'm 6'4", so I'm having to crouch down to look out the window, and yeah.
Like you just throw them out the side, like, oh, there it is.
Yeah. You just got to be smart about it, right? Because if you're sitting in the left seat, you want to make sure the grenade's in your left hand, because if you pull it with your right hand, well, now it's in the cockpit with you, and you don't want that. You don't want to accidentally drop it, and now you're, smoking out the cockpit. But
wow, yeah. I wonder if that'll be modeled in DCS.
Well, they do have the smoke grenades. It is going to be modeled. But yeah, I don't think you can pop them in the cockpit. I'll talk to Sven. Maybe we can work something out. That'd be cool.
Yeah, you definitely have to do that. So what'd you go teach?
Yeah, I went to Fort Benning, which is the home of infantry and armor. So I kind of returned to my armor roots. But they had an aviator slot there at something called the Cavalry Leader course, and that was a course to teach guys operations at the ground. It was ground stuff. For squadron operations, for like ground cavalry and things like that. So I went there thinking that I was just going to be the token aviator and just teach them aviation stuff. But I ended up being like a full-time instructor, and I was teaching ground tactics, and I helped write some doctrine and stuff like that. But it was all like, how to employ Bradley fighting vehicles and Humvees and artillery and aviation and all this stuff together. So it was a lot of fun. We got to travel quite a bit, but yeah, it was a non-flying job. So it was kind of, that part kind of sucked.
You're still a warrant officer at this point?
No. So when I left Iraq, I got shot on my first deployment, and so I came home.
Wait! You got to tell that story. Go on. How do we? I'm gonna have to pry it out of you, man. We're skipping some stories here. How did you get shot in Iraq?
Painfully. So yeah, well, Christmas Day 2006. We got told to go do a patrol, which, it was weird, because we were like, really, it's Christmas, like, it's a holiday. We knew the ground forces weren't going to do anything, because typically they're just driving around town waiting to get hit with an IED or something. And that day they weren't doing anything, and we got told, yeah, we want you guys to just go fly out for an hour and look around. I'm like, oh, okay. And I was talking to my buddy who was in the other ship, and we had this weird conversation that we had never had before. And we were like, man, I just don't feel good about today. Like, something just doesn't seem right. Like, we weren't happy that we were being sent out to do this mission. So we took off, and yeah, about 30 minutes into it, we were flying past an area. And I remember looking at this mosque where one of our guys had actually been shot and killed a few months before, Matt Mattingly. He was killed on September 13th of 2006. And I remember looking over at this mosque and thinking, like, I don't want to be in this part of town. Like, I just really don't. And I was turning my head. I was actually flying with my commander, and I was turning my head trying to think of, like, how do I eloquently tell my boss that let's just not be here? Like, why did you take us here type thing? I don't know. And right as I did, I heard this gunfire, and we were really low. I mean, we used to fly like 100 feet. I mean, we're dodging TV antennas and stuff on the houses, and it was really loud. It was like being on a range. And typically when we got shot at, we didn't even know. Like, or you just hear this pop, 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 and you'd come back and there'd be holes in the aircraft. This time it was like brr, and you could smell gunpowder. Like, we must have flown right over this dude or dudes. I think it was multiple dudes. And but yeah, so immediately I get hit in the arm. The bullet actually went through the collective that was between. I was sitting in the left seat, so it went under the right seater seat, went through the collective, and hit my arm in multiple locations. Blew out my chin bubble. There was a hole in the windshield. We took several rounds in the fuel cell, which is self-sealing, but after like 5 rounds, it stopped self-sealing because fuel was just pouring out of it. One of the rounds actually went into the engine. It went into the compressor and knocked some of the compressor blades loose. They found them in the combustion section of the engine, which is definitely not where they belong. Yeah, we got hit with like 13 or 15 rounds. I actually have show and tell. So I actually have the round that hit me right here. I can show you.
Dude, that's like out of a movie where you pull out the round and you wear it around. You're like,
Yeah,
this
exactly.
is the round that this was meant for me.
Yeah, well, I've done this enough times to know that the conversation would probably happen. So that's one of the chunks that got me. And here's some other junk, and this is one of the bullets that they pulled out of the aircraft that I got.
Holy crap!
Yeah, we got hit with a lot of stuff.
And it's not armor. You don't have protection from that. I mean,
well, go back to light aircraft, not a lot of room to do stuff like that. So underneath the seats, there was a little bit of armor, but these are like armor piercing rounds. They're 7.62. So it's got like a steel core and stuff. And so that's what's punched through. And then there's a little bit of armor plating that was around the engine, but unless you come at it from just that perfect angle, it's not going to do any good. But
wow.
I mean, it wasn't uncommon for aircraft to get hit. But typically guys don't lead aircraft enough because they just, conceptually, when you look at an airplane, it looks like it's going slow, right? And it's really hauling ass. And so typically aircraft would come back and they'd have holes all in the tail and stuff. Every single round that hit that aircraft was in the forward part of the fuselage. Like I said, we had like 3 go through the cockpit, at least. So that's why I say we were pretty close and he was pretty dialed in. But yeah, it was rough.
So the majority of aircraft that went down, was it small arms fire or man pads or RPGs, or what was taken down? Because you said that you lost a bunch. What was taking them down?
Well, we didn't lose a bunch. We just had a bunch that would come back with holes. I don't think any man pads were ever fired on any of my deployments. I know when I first showed up to my unit, the commander for the unit that I had joined had been shot down with a man pad, and they'd managed to crash and evade and stuff. But typically it was just small arms fire. I mean, you'd have guys shoot RPGs at you and stuff. I never did, but I know a few of my buddies did. But yeah, it was typically just small arms and stuff.
Wow. So going back, because we kind of went off on a tangent, how did that get you out of being a warrant officer back to being an officer?
Yeah, so I came home about halfway through that Iraq deployment, and just started thinking about my career and like, what do I want to do? And I know this sounds silly to people who want to fly, but I think for me, I just looked at my future and was like, yeah, but it's gonna be Groundhog Day. I'm just gonna keep doing this over and over. And some days I wish I had, but I kind of wanted to just do some other things, and being a commission guy kind of opened those doors for me in the Army. So I basically just put in some paperwork and said, hey, I'd like to go back to being a captain. If at the time the Army was screaming for captains because captains were leaving in droves, they were just over deployed and stuff. And so the Army needed some. And I just talked to somebody. I was like, hey, do you guys want another one? I'll come over. And they're like, oh yeah, great. So it was super easy. And I ended up staying in the same squadron, and which was interesting because now guys that worked for me, we were all pilots together. We were all boys. So it was an interesting dynamic.
Do you fly less as an officer? I mean, I've always heard warrants kind of just that's all they fly. So did that change the dynamic of your job?
Yeah, I mean, I got lucky in that I immediately went to school and came right back to the squadron and ended up taking command of one of the troops. And as a troop commander, I mean, it's your flight schedule, so you fly as much as you want. As long as you make the meetings with the boss, you're good. So I flew plenty, and then we deployed. For the majority of my time I was in command, we were in Afghanistan, so I was flying every day. but yeah, typically you will end up flying less over the course of your career, because that's how you end up in those teaching jobs. That's how you end up going to school for a year and things like that. And then when I was a field grade as a squadron XO, I flew quite a bit, but you got to make it a priority, I guess is all I can say. Is when you're in those jobs, if you're able to get on the flight schedule, you have to get yourself on the flight schedule. If you're waiting for someone else to do it for you, you're not gonna do it. And if you let all the admin part of your job take over your life, then yeah, you're never gonna have the time. So you just got to manage your time.
Wow. So how did you end up transitioning to the Apache?
So yeah, like I said, when I was at Benning, the Kiowa got divested, is the polite term, and that, this happens in every branch, because I've talked to Air Force guys that had this happen when the Pavlos went away and the Ospreys were coming up. It's a game of musical chairs, and when the music stops, not everyone's getting one. So I was one of the lucky ones that did, and so I was I was actually working in DC after Benning. I worked at the FAA as an interagency fellow.
Oh, wow.
And I got told that, hey, we've got an Apache slot for you. So we moved to Fort Hood, and then I immediately went back to Fort Rucker for like 5 months and went through the qualification course for that. So that's how that happened.
Did you wear a panty on your head
Daily, yeah, absolutely.
and drive a Jeep?
That's right.
That's
And drive a Jeep, yeah. Every
also
day to
from the
work, they issue a
documentary,
Jeep.
yeah.
Yeah.
Also from
yep.
the documentary Firebirds, in case anybody's wondering why I'm asking that question.
Yeah, because they're like, that's a really weird question. Yeah, I mean, look, that's what's funny about it too, is because when I went through, it was actually an international class that I was with. So it was like 11 Saudi Arabian lieutenants who hadn't flown a helicopter in like 2 years, because they went through primary training in Australia, and
Oh,
then
wow.
like were on a hold bubble until they could get to the States to fly Apaches, which it was
Jeez.
rough for them. Yeah. And
Yeah.
then it was me and 2 other Kiowa guys who were getting converted. So the Firebird jokes were a constant. Yeah, we were constantly, sir, when do we get our panties issued to us? That nature.
Are you right eye dominant? Did you have to?
Oh yeah, jeez.
Well, we're just gonna ruin the movie. So people, we won't talk any more Firebirds because we're gonna ruin the movie. But continue.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so but it's a long course, and it's kind of rough because you're already showing up as a rated aviator. You already know how to fly a helicopter, but you're going through the same kind of rigmarole that these kids who don't know how to do anything are doing. And so it got really monotonous, and it's a helicopter. It flies like a helicopter, but all the systems, obviously there's a lot of advanced systems in the Apache, and you're learning all that, and it's pretty overwhelming at times.
Is it easier to fly than like because like, for example, a fighter, the basic flying is much easier than most other aircraft because you're a weapon system now. I mean, was it easier to fly and manage just the flying part than the Kiowa?
Yeah, I think so. In fact, they would limit your ability to use, like, it has hold modes, right? So you just get it up into the profile that you want. You click on the hold modes, and you can eat a ham sandwich, and it's it's going to fly for you. It's not going to follow a route, like it doesn't have like an autopilot, like a flight director or something. But you set it on that course, and it's going to stay on that course. They wouldn't let you use that for the first couple phases because they wanted you to fly the aircraft. But yeah, I think it's easier. It's got a lot of, it'll hold the trim for you. So, from hovering, that's half the battle, is trying to keep the nose pointed in the right direction. As long as you don't mess with the trim button, it'll hold that direction for you.
It's a twin engine, right? Two
Yeah.
turbines. So
Yep.
you lose an engine, is it pretty much, it'll still keep going?
Yeah. Yeah. Particularly the Echo model, is pretty strong, but yeah, there's just certain things you can't do. Like, you're probably not going to hover, but you could do a rolling landing. That's kind of the emergency procedure. Is like, okay, you lose an engine, or for whatever reason you got to shut an engine down. You're just going to find a runway or somewhere that you can just kind of slide onto the ground.
So did you do a lot of auto rotations, or was it more, roll on landing kind of deal?
I think there's a certain amount that you got to do just for, your annual proficiency and stuff. But I don't feel like we practiced autos in the Apache as much as I did in the Kiowa, because yeah, you didn't have any options in the Kiowa. Like, it seemed like every EP ended with auto rotate, it was like, oh, this broke, auto rotate, whereas in the Apache, it was very, I mean, it's been a while since I've had to look, but there's very few because you've got another engine. And it's funny too, because I look back at flight school and we used to talk about being Kiowa guys like, oh, it's so much easier because we only have one engine to worry about. I don't know why we thought that. Like we thought having a second engine was making it worse. But then when we came over, we're like, oh, hell, this is a lot easier
I
actually,
like
because
this.
there's a less I got to worry about, But it was funny too, going through the course with these Apache guys teaching you, because they're always like, oh, don't go too low or too slow because, if you lose an engine. And I'm like, dude, I've spent the past 10 years flying on one engine lower than this and slower than this. So I'm not worried about it, But yeah, it's just a different way of looking at it, I guess.
But it's a lot. I mean, it's more of a fighter. It's like a hot rod, right? It's higher speed, more maneuverable kind of deal. Did that take some getting used to?
Yeah, it's definitely faster. I don't know that it's more maneuverable. I mean, the 58 is just, you could turn on a dime. In fact, we used to have to paint my troop. We would paint stripes on the rotor when we flew with Apaches. It's like, because we would do this, what we call a pink team, is old Vietnam thing, where you'd have a Kiowa with an Apache as his wingman, and we would typically turn so tight and they would lose us. And like, hey, we don't know where you're at, which is not good for your wingman to not know where you're at. So we would paint these stripes so they could kind of see us, But yeah, it's certainly faster, and it certainly has a lot more power. That, to go back to your point earlier about being weight and the power management with the Apache, you didn't have near as much to worry about. You just kind of suck in the power and take off. Whereas in the Kiowa, you're like trying to inch your way up sometimes, and using every trick you can figure out to fly. So overall, it's a much easier aircraft to fly.
Do you fly it from the front seat and the back seat, or just the back seat?
You can fly from either seat. It's the pilot's station is the back seat, so he's up and can see a little bit better, and then the front seater is the co-pilot gunner. But they both have the same cyclic. They have the same level of control of the aircraft. But you've got more functionality as a pilot in the back seat, and the front seat's got more functionality as a gunner in the front seat. So he can control a lot more of the weapon systems and things like that.
Was it tough getting used to the monocle?
Not as hard as Nick Cage had it. But it's
It's true,
it's,
but
yeah, they hammed it. It's really not. Like, I mean, all it is a HUD. It's just a HUD that just sits on your eye. I think the part that people kind of freak out about with it is the PENVIS, right? So that's the pilot's night vision sensor, or is it sight? It's one of the two, which is on the nose, the little bug eye looking thing. And of course, it's tied to you turn your head. There's sensors on your helmet. There's sensors inside the aircraft. I mean, I think fighters have stuff like that now too. But you turn your head and the sensor is going to move with you, and you've got that image projected into that monocle. And that is a little weird to get used to. When you're looking dead on, it's really not a big deal. The problem is when you look to the side, because now your right eye is over here, right? It's like 10 feet away from where it should be. So when you're looking off the side and your unaided eye is looking at something and your aided eye is looking at something else, and the things don't match, it gets a little funky. But generally speaking, it's pretty simple. And they do this torture device to get you good at it. It's called the bag, which again, Firebirds.
that is, he had to pass the bag. That was the whole
You got to
thing.
pass the bag. The bag is gross. The first time that you do it, absolutely. And I mean, you get in and it's completely blacked out, and you get in and there's tape in there, and they're like, cover every light hole. Like they want you to close it and cover every light hole. And they're like, it will mess with you if you don't. Because you do have that ocular rivalry where your left eye is looking and it sees something and it wants to focus on that. Well, that's gonna drag your right eye to it, and you want it completely focused on that thing. And so the front seater, the IP, he's sitting broad daylight. He's got not a care in the world. So you're in good hands, but it's very unnerving to just go fly a helicopter and you're like, I can't look out the window. It's very strange.
Do you? I mean, so this was a thing that was brought up earlier with a buddy of mine. Are you flying instrument approaches in these helicopters, or is that more like civilians where it's by exception?
You can. I mean, we practice them. The thing about like the Kiowa and the Apache before it became the Echo model is they weren't instrument rated, so it was an emergency procedure to do it. Like, so you had to practice it and you had to do so many rounds a year and things like that. and you were never good at it. You were just good enough to survive. But with the Echo model, it had some more advanced stuff, and we actually did fly in the clouds and things like that, which again is very unnerving. A helicopter guy, if you go above 2,000 feet, you might as well be in space. So to fly in the clouds was very unnerving.
We went up to 4,000 feet, and I told my instructor, he's like, "What? Why were you that high? With the doors off?" Like, yeah, with the doors off. He's like, why were you that high?
Well, and I got my private pilot's license a couple of years ago in Cessnas, and I mean, like I would look at the winds, like, oh, the winds at 6,000 are really good. I'm like, oh, that's really high though. I don't know if I can do that. So I'd be at like 2,000 just fighting, to get where I'm going. But yeah, but to your answer, to answer your question, yeah, we would do instrument stuff. Just, it wasn't really our bag.
No. So GPS approaches in the E model, like RNAV and all that stuff, or not even
Yeah,
that
they're still working
advanced?
through the RNAV thing, because I guess they need like the database. It's got to be a certain standard or something. I don't think they've cracked that code yet, but you could do ILSs and stuff like that, which we couldn't do in a 58 or a Delta model.
Did you deploy in the Apache?
I did. That was my last deployment. We did a short tour, like 5 months, back in 2018, I want to say. So I was a squadron XO. It's like a DO in Air Force, I think. And we deployed, ironically enough, back up to near Mosul. We were in Erbil, which is beautiful, a beautiful city. Right across from Mosul, which is not a beautiful city. And there wasn't much going on. It wasn't a very exciting deployment. We did a little bit in Syria. We had some guys over there doing some good work against ISIS. But other than that, yeah, we spent a lot of time kind of sitting on QRF, quick reaction force, just waiting for something to happen and go launch. But Iraq was pretty tame back then.
So as far as now, I don't want to get anything classified, but doctrinally for a helicopter, is it mostly running attacks, or do you do anything with a hover? It seems like a hover would be a little bit more dangerous, but concealed if you can, right?
Yeah, well, it kind of goes back to your point about using the sight and looking over the mountains and stuff. It's just different. It's different tactics for different environments. So in the Iraq type conflict, yeah, I mean, you're not hovering. The only time you're hovering is to land or something. So you're doing a lot of running engagements, but absolutely you're practicing back home for the big one, hovering, because that's going to be the way you're probably going to do it against a high threat environment, sneaking around.
Yeah. So two pilots, just like the Kiowa, how do they determine who does what? Just whatever's on the schedule?
You kind of decide yourself. The way the schedule is made, it really just denotes who is the PC or the pilot in command, and who is the pilot. And for those who don't know, because it does get kind of convoluted, everyone is a pilot. And then once you have reached a level of maturity, as they judge you to be a pilot in command. And so you'll take a little check ride and they're like, okay, you're a pilot in command. And that means you can sign for the aircraft. So now you can fly with anybody. The pilot, the PI, can only fly with other PCs. So like you and I could both be PCs. The schedule comes out. It says, okay, Mover's the PC on Monday. Okay, cool. And then from there, it's, hey, what seat do you want to fly? And it's like, well, last time I flew front seat, so this time I'll fly back seat. Okay, cool. And you'll kind of swap off.
So what does the front seater do, and what does the back seater do? Does the back seater have any weapons capability? I mean, could you do any of that stuff single seat?
Yeah, well, so the Apache is definitely not a single seat aircraft. The way it's just laid out, there's certain things that you can only do from the back seat. There's certain things you can only do from the front seat. So it is decidedly a two-man show. But you can absolutely control the weapons from both stations. So that's different from the Kiowa. So like a typical, an example would be if you're doing like a running rocket engagement, where the guy in the front seat is up on the TADS, which is the big bug eye thing on the front. He's observing the target. You're in the back seat, you're lining up the aircraft, and he's got control of the pods. They articulate, right? So they can go up and down. And so as long as you keep them lined up, he can line up the elevation of the rockets and shoot.
Oh, cool.
And now as you're breaking away, I can action the gun from my seat link it to my head, and I can just turn. As I'm turning away, I'm just shooting at that or some other target or something.
That's awesome.
Or another thing that I used to do, and I'm sure other guys did too, is like if you are in a hover position, and let's say you're unmasking to look for enemy tanks or whatever, the front seater, he's on the TADs and he's looking for targets and he's going to shoot Hellfires. I'm going to action the gun just in case, somebody comes around the corner and tries to take a shot at us. I can just look at them and shoot.
Holy crap.
Yeah,
awesome.
The gun is awesome. Like everyone, it's funny because like, when you talk to A10 guys, like everyone's like, oh, the gun. Exactly. It's the same thing with the Apache. Like I love the gun. Like rockets and missiles, yeah, that's cool, but the gun is really awesome.
What is the gun in Apache?
It's a 30 millimeter.
Wow.
It's not the same though, like the rate of fire is like 625 rounds per minute, so it's nowhere near the same as an A10. I brought show and tell for that because I knew that would come up too. So here's the shell casing for a 30. But yeah, but it's a lot of fun to shoot because it is like, I mean, like I said, it's tied to your head, and you've got that HUD in your eye, and you just look at something and make it go away.
Can it look over
your miss?
Can it look back or anything, or is it kind of field of view limited?
Yeah, it's like 90 degrees. I can't remember exactly. I think it's 90 off both sides. But yeah, and then if you miss, you just kind of tilt your head a little bit and make the rounds go where they want. So yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah,
and they're like hand grenades, right? So that's the other difference is I think the A10s are more like just for penetration. They're like those depleted uranium rounds or whatever, whereas these are essentially like hand grenades. I mean, they have some penetration, but they're designed to explode. So that's why when you see any kind of gun camera footage from an Apache, the rounds are kind of all over the place. That's really by design. It's not meant to put every round in the same spot because it'd be kind of a waste. It's an area effect weapon. So you're putting rounds all over the place and they're blowing up like little hand grenades, and you're just making noise.
How many rounds do you get?
So the stock Apache would carry 1,200 rounds.
Oh God.
That's a lot.
Holy jeez.
Yeah. But what came out of the fight in Iraq and Afghanistan, at least I think this is where the genesis of it came from, is that's a lot of ammo, and I probably need more fuel. So what they came up with is something called a Robbie tank, and they basically take the ammo bin, which is in the belly, they drop it out, and they replace it. It's kind of weird to say it's a fuel cell that carries ammo, if that makes any sense. Yeah. So it gives you a few hundred extra pounds of fuel and also has a 300 round drum of ammo in it.
So you only have 300 rounds when you have the Robbie tank, or do you?
Yeah, but you've got another 30 minutes of flight time. So,
wow.
Which in a fight like Afghanistan and Iraq, like your number one weapon is your radio. It's showing up, it's making noise, and it's being able to talk on the radio. You're probably not going to get into a fight where you're shooting 300 rounds in Iraq and Afghanistan. I mean, if you are, great. That sounds like a lot of fun. But typically you're not going to get in that kind of fight. But you will get in a fight where you need an extra 30 minutes of fuel.
So did you get in any fights in Afghanistan with the, you said Afghanistan or Iraq, sorry, Iraq with the Apache? No,
I didn't. We had a few guys. We had a really large engagement like during our RIP process. So the relief in place, right? So you're switching out with the new unit. And people may remember this happening. There was a big gunfight between Syrian, not Russians, who were essentially attacking like an oil field. And we had special forces in the area, and we had our Apache. So it was one of our teams and one of this other unit. I can't remember which unit it was. And they happened to be on deck that night, and it was a huge gunfight. I can't remember the name of it. There's like a Wikipedia page about it. Like it was this huge battle.
Wow.
It was the first time in a long time that an Apache pilot was looking at an enemy tank. And he kicks himself because he's watching this tank and he's like, I'm gonna shoot this tank. He's excited.
Yeah.
But they're listening to the JTAC, and the JTAC's like, no, negative. I need you to shoot at these personnel over here. I'm gonna have the jets attack the tank. And he's like, I should have just blew that dude off, and just shot the tank. But yeah, it was a huge fight, and so those guys were part of that, and we had a couple little flare ups like that. But no, it was pretty benign when I was flying. Unfortunately, I would have liked to at least give the gun a go. But yeah,
are you still flying the Apache?
I don't fly anymore, just by virtue of job. So when I left Fort Hood, I went to be what's called an observer coach trainer at the Joint Readiness Training Center. They're in Fort Polk, Louisiana. So I was evaluating aviation units that would come through. And then now I'm in a job. I'm just basically retiring right now. So yeah, I could fly. Like it's one of those where we have an agreement with the brigade that's here where I could get on the schedule. But I've been doing this long enough to know that they're going to give me like the 2 a.m. flight on a Friday. And, and I'm barely going to make minimums, but I'm going to have to study the same amount. And I'm just like, I got other stuff going on. So yeah, I don't really fly.
Yeah. Did you do any air-to-air stuff with the Apache? Like, dissimilar or anything like that?
No, like I said, the Stingers kind of went away as an option. I remember early days of Kiowa, we would practice how to hide from jets. Like, I don't know if we were any good at it. We never actually did it with a jet. So I don't know if it would have worked, but, we talked about like, okay, well, if enemy aircraft come at you, this is what you got to do. But yeah, I never did any sort of air to air. It's not really a thing. Like I know again, going back to the only thing that we have, which is Firebirds, and they talk about all this stuff. I never had that class. So
Yeah. Wow. So question I ask everybody, and you kind of touched on this. Do you have a story, make them tell you no, where you overcame adversity to kind of where people tell you, hey, it's not possible
sure.
to accomplish, what you're doing and your aviation goals?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's several. I don't know if they're super compelling. I know I touched on the one where you got to make things a priority, right? So if you want it, you've got to want it, and you got to put the work in for it. But you also got to make sure that when people dictate to you the rules, that they actually know what they're talking about, right? So when I was in flight school, I wanted to fly Kiowas. That was my number one choice, but I was told that well, you can't. You're too tall. Because there's I I barely passed. That's another, I guess. When I took my initial flight physical before I even got into flight school, they do all the measurements. I'm sure you had the same thing, and they measure my sitting height. And again, I'm really tall, and he measured me. He's like, "Oh, you're disqualified." I was like, "Why?" He says, well, "You're too tall." I said, "Well, what do you mean? Your sitting height? You're 102 centimeters sitting height. The max is 101."
Ooh.
And I said, "Measure me again." And I'm just like squeezing down in my seat, as much as I can. And the guy measured me. He's like, "Oh, okay, you're 101." I was like, "Thank you." Well, then I get to flight school, and I don't remember how it came up, but he was like, "Oh, I want to fly Kiowas." And I'm like, "Oh, you can't. You're too tall. Look here. This manual says 95 centimeter sitting height is the requirement to be under to fly Kiowas." And I was like, "Oh, okay, well that sucks. I guess I'll try to be an Apache guy or something." And right before we did the selection, I went in and I asked them. I was like, "Are you guys sure that that's the rule? Because it just seems really weird." And they called out to the airfield where they do the Kiowa training, and they were like, "Oh, no, 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 that's old information. So that's the old Alpha Chuck. Yeah, they just haven't
Oh,
updated it yet." And the Alpha Chuck
yeah.
is different. Like there's a kind of a bubble top to the Delta model. I flew the Alpha Chuck for like 2 weeks. It was terrible because I was like this the whole time and just jammed in there. But yeah, so I guess I would just say that, and I'm kind of dealing with that right now with some medical stuff where, sometimes people read the book a certain way and other people read a different way. So if you get told no on things, get a second opinion.
Absolutely, absolutely. Was the Apache roomier? Is it a bigger cockpit?
It is and it isn't, right? So a ton of headspace, room to move. The thing in the Kiowa, like, there's Velcro on your uniform, you're constantly stuck to the other guy. You're just but there's a lot of space in there. The one thing, there's no leg room because you've got these giant pedals. In the Kiowa, it's just like a bar, right? So
Yeah.
again, I'm tall, I have long legs. I would just stick my legs up over the bar. But in the Apache, it's these huge pedals with toe brakes and stuff. Like your feet aren't going anywhere. So you're stuck 6 hours. That's where your legs are, and you're not doing anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Other than getting shot, because that seems pretty scary to me, what is your scariest story in a helicopter?
Hmm. I guess probably the scariest. We were in Afghanistan, and it was nighttime, and I was flying with one of my lieutenants, and he had just come back from leave, and we were doing this just our standard patrol, and I put him in the right seat, um, and I was sitting in the left seat, and we were just flying around, and we did like 2 hours, and he was complaining. He's like, "Man, my back hurts," And I was like, "Yeah, you just come off leave, you've lost your edge, So I told him, I was like, when we go to the FARP to get gas, we can swap seats. And that was another cool thing in the Kiowa, like the engine running, you could get out. It was this weird little dance where like one guy would get out and hold the controls, and the other guy would get out and run around and grab the controls, and the other guy would run it. It was a weird little thing, but we could do it. And so we swapped seats halfway through the mission, and then we went and flew the rest. And then we were heading back to base, and we were about 10 miles away from our fob, and we were doing something. I think some guys thought they saw something, so we were kind of zipping around and just looking and stuff. And we were just turning to head back to the airfield, and I heard this whizzing sound. And I remember thinking, like, what would someone shoot at me that sounds like this whizzing sound? And it just happened for a second. And then all of a sudden the controls like jumped in my hands, and I heard this bong, which is not a good sound in some cases. And I looked down at my screen and it says hydraulic failure. Um, which, I'd never, well, I take that back. I had hydraulic failure once before, but it was rare. What I didn't know was that whizzing sound was the hydraulic fluid shooting out of the system because it had been fraying against this exposed screw or something for who knows how long, and just a vibration, and finally it had just and so the hydraulics freeze up, and you can still fly the Kiowa. It's just like losing power steering. It's very mushy, and you're going to over control and stuff. And so it's nighttime. We're under goggles. I've never flown hydraulics off under goggles. It's not something that you practice. In fact, the last time that you actually fly without hydraulics is in flight school. Like, we don't even practice it in the force. You kind of go through some other motions, but you don't actually turn the hydraulics off. So now we're like, oh crap, we got to figure out what to do. The problem with our little fob was it was a dirt runway. Ooh. And we had always theorized, like, what are you going to do if you have to do a run on landing because you have skids? And are you going to try to land on a dirt runway? I mean, C-17s and stuff are landing on this thing. Yeah, but they're skids. Well, next to it was a UAV strip where they had these kind of mid-sized UAVs would come in. Well, it had arrestor cables on it, and that's what the UAVs would catch, like a carrier or something. I had just happened to a couple days before drive past it and pay attention to where those cables were. And so I had a pretty good idea of where they were. The problem is it was this little podunk fob in the middle of nowhere, Afghanistan. It had no lighting on the runway whatsoever. Certainly the UAV strip had nothing. So we go flying back, and because I hadn't flown hydraulics off in such a long time, I forgot how bad the tail felt with the hydraulics off. And so I thought something was wrong with the tail rotor too, because it was just so sluggish. And so I told my left seater, I tell Phil, I'm like, man, I think something's wrong with the tail rotor too. And he's just like, oh my God, he's just panicking. And I was like, you picked the wrong time to come back from leave. And so we do this, B-52 traffic pattern to get lined up on the runway and stuff. And the crash rescue is all waiting for us. And it's like the only lights I can see. And I'm my wingman's talking to ATC and doing all this stuff for me. And I'm like, dude, tell them to turn the lights off. I can't see anything. And I just basically aim at this dark patch where I think the runway is. I turn on my landing light. And now, because I think something's wrong with the tail rotor, I want to keep the airspeed up above like 40 knots because I don't want to lose directional control. So I'm screaming in for this dark spot, hoping that that's where the runway is, and hoping I miss the arrestor cables. And as we get closer, I can see, and we touched down and everything was fine. But yeah, it was pucker factor for a good 10 minutes or so, I guess.
Wow. Yeah. So would they fix it and get it flying the next day?
Yeah. I mean, it's easy fix. I don't know if it was the next day, but probably just because parts and stuff. But yeah, I mean, it was literally just this, the line with like the mesh around it and stuff. Yeah, it was just blown out, and that was it. And it carried like, this much hydraulic fluid. Like, it doesn't carry much. So it was easy to fill back up.
Wow. So you're not flying military. Do you do any civilian flying or anything now?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't in a while just because it costs money, and I'm sure it just costs so much just to go fly for an hour in a Cessna. But I did do my private, and then I'm looking to, here in the next few months, medical willing, go up to a place called Infinity Flight School up in New Jersey, and get all of my commercial multi-engine ratings up there using the GI Bill. Yeah. And then hopefully get some sort of, big boy job on the outside doing that stuff.
Wow. So Tell me about your, I told you we'd come full circle to it. Tell me about your podcast and YouTube channel. I didn't want to get too much into the Apache stuff because that is actually how I found you, was some of the videos you've made on the Apache stuff. Is that knowing that DCS is coming out with the Apache, or are you just doing it
Yeah.
for funsies?
Yeah, I mean it's all funsies, but that in particular, sure. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, there's a little bit of hype train. People want to learn about that stuff. But to really the origin, I guess, if you will, is um probably 8 months, 9 months ago at this point. I've been into DCS for a really long time. But to the broader picture, like there's a lot of media out there for the fighter side of things, right? There's a lot of stuff, and you look around, there's really nothing for the rotary wing side. So when I started my YouTube channel, it was really just an intention to bring some of that perspective in, because there are guys that are in the community, but I'm looking around, I'm like, well, there's no helicopter dudes doing anything. So I
Yeah.
figured I would do that just to draw attention to helicopters. It's not really for me, but it was just for fun. And then through that, I met some people, and one guy who I hope's watching, Kelly. We became good friends, and he had some experience doing podcasts, and he made the suggestion. He's like, "Why don't you do a podcast? You know a lot of people, and you got a lot of great stories and stuff." And so I was like, "Yeah, I mean, let's do it." And so we started that back in October, and that's the Low Level Hell podcast. And really, it's just an effort to draw attention, I guess you will, and give some media credit to helicopter guys. Because, you know, as a helicopter guy, you're doing a lot of stuff that the average person's just not hearing about, and you're
Right.
getting into it all the time. And it's not a ding by any means against the fighter community, but sometimes you'll read about something, like, oh, this A-10 guy got this DFC for this thing. And you read the write up and you're like, yeah, I did that last Tuesday, and I didn't even get like free eggs at the chow hall. Um, and so the point really is just that there's a lot going on that people don't know about. And the show is definitely not about me. It's just an effort to draw some attention to the community. And there's just so many great stories. We just published episode 9 for our Patreon supporters, and then it's coming out this Wednesday. A Navy guy who flew Seahawks, was in Desert Storm. Then he flew
Oh,
as a
wow.
police officer for a while, and he's got some wild tales and stuff. And so yeah, it's just a good time to kind of sit down and drink a beer and listen to some stuff.
Are you involved at all in the Kiowa or Apache for DCS?
Yeah, I'm definitely on the Kiowa side. Myself and Barrett, who I had mentioned earlier, and a few other guys are definitely involved in that. So I've flown the module a few times. I mean, I have it downstairs, and they'll tell us like, hey, test this certain flight regime or something. So we'll mess around with it and give our feedback. I do not do the Apache, and the reason being is I'm not what I would consider a good Apache guy. And what I mean by that is I only flew it for a couple of years. I did like 500 hours in it. Um, which is still a lot, but not a ton. And so I don't feel like I'm an authority on it, and I don't want to present myself as one. And two, a vast majority of my time is as an Echo model guy, and they're modeling a Block 2 Delta, which I think I flew maybe 5 hours in a Block 2. So, there's just enough variance in there that I'm probably not a good person. But I know enough about Apaches in general, and that can, to your point about the videos, is I know enough where to look in the manual to find some good stuff and give a little bit of
Yeah.
context and perspective. And that's just what I've been trying to do for guys, because I run a Discord. We've got like 1,200 people in there, and it's constant conversation about, well, what do I need to do to get my joystick? How do I map my controls? And just
Yeah.
questions about the pinvis and the monocle and stuff like we talked about. And so after a while, you're like, well, I'll just do a video on it, and that'll maybe answer all the questions. So, and I've
Yeah.
got some guys in the background that help me out too. Like like a couple instructor pilots, and I'm like, hey, is this right? Like, am I saying this? Am I explaining this right? Because
Right.
I'm terrified of putting something out. It's like, well, actually, it's this. So.
Yeah. You always have to have the cadre of bros that are like, hey, dude, just make sure I don't say anything completely stupid.
Absolutely. Yeah. I've told, and I've charged them with that, right? It's like, guys, if I sound like I'm going off the rails on any of this stuff, like rein me in, because I don't want it to be the Brian Harris experience. Like, it's really just about helicopters and stuff. And I'm the guy who decided to step up and do it. That's it. That's the only thing that makes me different, I guess.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. Have you flown other helicopters in DCS, like the Huey and stuff?
Yeah, I have them all. I didn't until I started this journey. I had only had the K50, which I hated. And I hated it until I flew the Apache because it flies a lot like the Apache, but I didn't understand how it worked. And so being a Kiowa guy, I was like, this is garbage. I can't stand this. But then when I kind of circled back to it after flying the Apache, and I was like, oh, okay, so this is like this. And so it made a lot more sense. But I really enjoy that one. It feels to me the most accurate. The Huey, is good. I know a lot of people think it's the most accurate. I've never flown a Huey, so I can't say, but I think there's certain things that are kind of a little janky to me.
It seems to like to get into vortex range state or settle with power a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah, it likes to shake and the rotor likes to come off every time I land. Yeah, I just feel like I I think part of the problem is as a skid guy, I'm used to landing with a little bit of forward momentum,
Mm-hmm.
and the skids will accept that. DCS is like, nope, the ground is made of glue. You're stuck here, and so you hit with the Huey, and the rotor's like, see ya, and your skids are like, we're staying here. So I think that's part of my problem. But but I just recently got the MI8 and the Gazelle, in the past couple of months, and so I've played around with them. But
You'll have the hind, but you got to put in, what is it, right pedal to make the hind work?
yeah, maybe I don't know. Maybe it does spin the other way. I know the Gazelle does, and that screwed me up like nobody's business. I wasn't prepared for that because it's muscle to me at this point. It's muscle memory. But yeah, so I look forward to the hind. Right now, I'm actually dabbling more in the fixed wing side. I've been playing with the Hornet a lot and trying to hone my carrier landing skills, which I mean that's a game in and of itself right there. Trying to do all that
Dude, we're
stuff.
180 out. You're trying to do fixed wing stuff, and I'm like, I want to fly helicopters.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, cool. If you got a couple minutes, I'd like to turn it over to the which I should have asked them prior to start getting their questions ready. So start asking your questions. But there was a question earlier. Does the hookah have a story, and is it featured on your podcast?
Yeah, that's my Missoula hookah. I got that in Missoula for like $30. And I tell you what, I wish I just bought it because I was like, oh, that's cool. It's a hookah. And then I came home from that deployment and I saw them in a store in New Orleans for like, $120. And I was like, hell, mine's better than that. I should have bought like 20 of them, which I'm pretty sure is like racketeering or some sort of illegal activity. But no, there's no story. It barely works. My wife keeps wanting me to throw it away, but I refuse because it's cool. It's history.
Awesome. X Grunt here from Inclusive Model Designs. Did our IR strips ever blind you looking down? Not intentionally.
The IR strobes, no. I mean, they're super handy. The problem with the IR strobes is everyone has them. So it was always hard to tell, like, okay, well, who am I talking to? And I think it's probably the same for the fixed wing community. Like when you're talking to a JTAC or somebody that's controlling you, it's helpful to know which vehicle or which guy you're talking to because he's going to say things that matter if it's based on that guy or that guy, right? It's hey, it's to my north. Okay, well, north of who? So the strobes were never really a problem. The problem really was when everyone wanted to use their little laser pointers on their rifles because it looked like a White Snake concert going off. Like there's just lasers everywhere, and you're like, okay, because you want somebody just like, hey, one dude, turn on your IR pointer and mark the target, and you got 50 dudes, so.
Yeah, that is awesome. Justin would like to know, this is more of just a generality, but can you talk about the WAFT, Warrant Officer Flight Training Program?
Um, a little bit. I mean, all that is getting you in the door to be a warrant officer or aviator. So, and again, I'm not the authority, but if you send me a note on my YouTube, I can hook you up with guys who are. So there is a way to become what we call street to seat or high school to flight school. You can join the Army to be a warrant officer. Typically, warrant officers are guys who are prior enlisted. But aviation is a different animal where you can come straight in for that. And so you'll go to like basic training, then you'll go to the warrant officer candidate school, which is where they teach you how to be a warrant officer. And then you'll go over to flight school. And once you're in flight school, you're all mixed together. Like you'll have lieutenants and warrants all mixed up and doing stuff together. So, but yeah, as far as particulars, I don't know all the things that you need to do. I know you need to get like a letter of recommendation. And of course, you need to pass the physical, and of course, you need to take the whatever it's called now, the FAST or something, the flight aptitude test. Which people will tell you can't study for. I disagree, because I studied for it. If nothing else, it gives you an idea of what to expect question wise. So I went to the library on base and I found an aptitude test and I looked at it, and that saved me time because it's a timed test. At least it was when I took it. You've saved yourself time understanding the types of questions, because there's some weird questions in there, and if you're going to spend 2 minutes trying to decipher like what they want from you, that's 2 minutes you've wasted. So at least go into there armed for that.
Yeah. Mermaid Devil says, "Stay safe, Captain." Which you're a major now, right?
I am a major. Yeah. Captain's a more fun rank though.
Will you pin on 05 before it's over?
No, I'm retiring. So hopefully I'll be out of here in the next year.
Do you fly? Is it mixed? I mean, warrant officers and officers pretty much interchangeable on the flying schedule, or?
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, just by virtue of the raw statistics, you're very rarely going to fly with another commissioned guy. I mean, I certainly have many times, but yeah, you're typically with a warrant.
Sim pilot asks if you've ever had to eject.
Yes, I've had to eject. I just couldn't.
Yeah. Can you talk more about how effective the Kiowa was at its role? Where are your troops, and may I go there and count them?
How is it more effective?
Or how effective was it at its role? So, okay. I mean, was it an effective?
Sure. So it's there's a lot of context to that question, right? Because what is the role that we're talking about? So again, go back to what I said. What was the aircraft designed to do? It's looking for mass formations of Russian tanks moving across the Fulda Gap. Yes, the MMS, the mass mounted sight, had this very crappy thermal imaging system that could absolutely pick out there's a bunch of tanks. And that's all you needed. And squirt the laser at it, get a grid, send it to the shooters, and then let them do business. It was perfect for that. You're looking for two dudes in placing an IED, or are they just hanging out by the side of the road? You got to get pretty close to figure that out with the optics on a Kiowa. So yes, it was effective, but in the coin fight, it wasn't designed to do that. And so we had to do things very differently. And I think it was effective, but that had everything to do with how the pilot adapted to the situation instead of the technology answer, because the technology didn't help us. We rarely use the sight. During the day, I mean, you wouldn't use it hardly at all. At night, you could, kind of get up high and slow down and just kind of look down a route and stuff because nobody could hear you. But during the day, I mean, they're going to know you're there. So you might as well just sit around and use your eyeballs.
Wow. Did it have like we call it rover, like a data link to like JTAGs? Yeah. Could you send that to the dude's last laptop?
When I was flying them, no. I don't know if they got necessarily that when I left, because we were getting upgraded when I left to do stuff with UAVs, so they could pull the feed in, and I think they could push the feed out. With the Apache, absolutely. Like you could pull in your wingman's feed and see what he was looking at, and vice versa, and you could push it out and pick up UAVs. Hell, you could control UAVs with the Apache. But yeah, with the Kiowa, I can't remember if you could actually transmit that to somebody on a rover.
Do you have like an actual data link? Like in the Hornet Link 16, we have saddle in the Block 30, so you could see your wingman and all that on the...
In the Echo model Apache, it had Link 16, which it's insane. Like I didn't realize how long like the fighter community had Link 16, and we just got it, and it is a miracle. Like, I mean, it made life so much easier, particularly just at night. Like just the ability to, the guy pops up in your HUD, you're like, where's my wingman? Oh, there he is. He's right there. Everything's highlighted for you. You can see him on the screen. You can see what he's looking at on the screen and match things up. Yeah, it's beautiful. I wish we'd have had that forever.
Dale asks, can we get the Major a better headset or mic or light setup? Your mic is awesome. I don't have any problems with your mic. Do you need a new
my light sucks.
So Dale wants to know if he can get you a new light.
Well,
join his Patreon. Join his Patreon, and you can get that. Which vehicle did you feel more powerful in, the M1 Abrams or the Apache?
Probably the Apache.
Because you have to
Um,
yell, "I am the greatest" when you fly the Apache.
routinely. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. But I mean, the tank, that thing will, I mean, it's just badass. I mean, it's just solid, just pure raw energy. I've watched guys backing up into trees, this big around 80-foot pine trees, not even know they're knocking it over, and it's
Oh
like, call him
God.
like, hey dude, look behind you. And there's the tree at, 45-degree angle. And he's like, oh crap. Those things are just raw energy. And very stable. Like the gun, like I remember just bouncing across the field during an assault, and that gun tube is just rock solid on the target. The tank is just bouncing underneath it, and that gun's not moving anywhere. So they're
That's
really
awesome.
awesome.
Barundus, which I don't know if you know him,
Yeah,
wants.
that's Barrett.
Yeah, well, he wants to know where's your Stetson.
It's right there, hanging up
You
by
should be
my
wearing.
tail rotor.
You should be wearing it, sir.
I
He's
should.
that's his. That's his. Literally says, "Why aren't you wearing your Stetson, Casmo?"
Yeah, it would help with the lighting, I guess.
Uh, Tell us about your spur ride.
Yeah, so a spur ride is exactly that. So it's how you get your spurs, which is again, and as an air cavalryman or a ground cavalryman, that's kind of one of your things. So I've got my spurs, well, some of my spurs hanging there. A spur ride is not hazing, but it probably feels like it at the time. And every unit's different. I did mine in Korea, and it was an all-night festival of fun and excitement. So you would run and you would do a ruck march, and then you would do these little lanes where you'd have to navigate to a place, and they would make you do something insane, like carry all this heavy stuff up this hill and quickly, and just a random assortment of things. And yeah, I did that back in 2001 in Korea.
That's awesome.
It's
That's
fun.
interesting. That's history I did not know existed.
Yeah, it's more
And
fun to be a spur holder during those, because you're the guy that's telling them all to do the stupid stuff, and trying to tempt them, like, hey, dude, if you quit right now, I'll go to Burger King and get you a Whopper, and you could just
ring
see
the
the look on their
bell.
face.
Ring the
Yeah,
bell.
exactly. Ring the bell. It's hell week, but only a day.
Uh, okay. Well, so update. Dale has now subscribed to your Patreon because you need a new light. But
Hey,
Casey wants to know if you have an OnlyFans.
oh Jesus. Negative.
I just read the questions, man. I don't have any. Uh,
Thank you though.
yeah. So, which aircraft did you enjoy flying? I think I know the answer to this. Flying more, the Kiowa or the Apache?
That's a really hard question, and I get that one a lot. It's just apples and oranges. I really enjoyed the Kiowa because it was just so much fun. Because you're flying it, right? The computer's not doing anything for you. It's you got to put in pedal, you got to make the right corrections. Whereas the Apache can do a lot of that work for you. But God bless. I mean, it's so awesome to have heat and air conditioning, and just the things that do help you do your job in the Apache. And that gun. I mean, it's just a lot of fun.
It sounds like the Apache's kind of built like a fighter, where it's just flying is
Yeah.
secondary, and it's
It is. It obviously I've never flown a fighter, but I mean I play DCS, so it's practically same
pretty
thing.
much the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Um what's cool about the Apache is that it does take a lot of the thinking out of it for you in some ways. So for instance, as a 58 guy, you're used to constantly looking at your temperatures and your torque and all this stuff. In the Apache, like you don't have any of that stuff displayed. I mean, you can, but you're wasting a screen doing that because it's going to tell you, right? So it's management by exception. The engine page is going to pop up and tell you, hey, your torque is exceeded, or your temperatures are too high or something. So it's in the back of your mind that something's going on, but it's doing it for you, and it's going to tell you if there's a problem. And then if you have an emergency, the checklist pops up and it's like, hey, you should do this, this, and this. Okay. So yeah, it's a lot easier. You can focus
Uh,
on the fun part.
do you know a guy named Chase?
Yeah.
He wants to know the pigeon story.
Pigeons. Are you talking about the pigeon in the rocket pod? That
He
might be
said,
the
make him tell you the pigeon story.
um yeah, I guess that's the rocket pod. I should have sent you that picture. Yeah, I have a picture of a pigeon who went along for a ride with me in Missoula. So what's funny, you might appreciate this as a pilot. I don't know your experience, but it seems like birds in the US, when they're threatened, they dive.
Mm-hmm.
Birds in Iraq climb. I don't know why. And so we were flying pretty low over the desert, and there was this huge flock of birds out on the ground. And we were kind of flying over them, and they all just decided to take off right as we flew overhead. And if you've ever seen that movie, I think it's called The Edge, and it's got Anthony Hopkins, and they crash in the middle of Alaska. Well, the scene with like all these birds are just banging off the canopy of the plane that they're in and everything. That was it was like birds just everywhere, just hitting the canopy and everything. And so we kind of get through that, and I'm like, oh my God, and I'm shaking the controls and making sure everything works. I'm like, okay, I think we're good. And my left seater, he looks out and he looks back. There's one in the rocket pod. And so this pigeon was like, I mean, he was dead, but his like butt was stuck in the hole, and his wings and his head and his arms were all flapping outside, and he was just kind of whipping around. So we struggled with what to do. I like shook the aircraft in a vain hope that he would just kind of fall out, and he didn't. And then we were like, well, what if we shot a rocket? Like, what would happen?
That's
and
my first thought.
Yeah, exactly. And we were like, well, best case, we'll get covered with bird guts, and worst case, the rocket will explode. So we opted against any of those, and we flew back to the FARP, and he got out and pulled the bird out. And I mean, he held it up and showed me, and I mean, the wingspan was it was a couple feet, so it was a big bird.
Wow.
I don't know if that's the story he's talking about.
I don't know. We'll have to see if really that was the thing. But I mean, do you know anything about the 160th and why they don't use the Apache? That was the next question from Craig.
So if you ever read Michael Durant's book, so Michael Durant was the guy that was captured in the whole Black Hawk Down situation, but he wrote a book years ago, and he talked about, it was his autobiography of going through the 160th. And if I recall, and it's been forever since I read that, but if I recall, Apache was fairly new when Panama was going on, and the 160th did an operation. They did a few things with Panama, but one of them involved an Apache that they had basically on loan or something. And it failed horribly. Like, I think it missed the timeline because some sort of technical problem with the aircraft. And I think from that moment, the way I remember it, again, it's been forever, was that the 160 was like, nope, screw that. Like, that's too much baggage to come with. Because the problem with, more advanced aircraft is more things break, right? So a Kiowa was very reliable because it was just a helicopter with some random stuff thrown on it. Whereas an Apache, it was not uncommon. It's kind of like starting an old computer, and it wakes up stupid, and you're like, well, let me hit restart. We would call it the Longbow reset. You would just shut everything down and wait 30 seconds or something, and then start it right back up and hope that, Windows comes up, or whatever, and it pops up properly.
Yeah, that's the Viper reset. Turn it off, turn it back on, see if it works.
Yeah, there you go.
That's interesting. Yeah. So do they use the Kiowa? Did they use that in the Night Stalkers at all?
No, they used Little Birds, which are OH-6s, essentially highly modified. Yeah. In fact, that's kind of where the Kiowa Warrior came from, is the whole Operation Prime Chance time period. And I'm not a wizard at this time period. I'm trying to be, because I want it for the podcast. But essentially, you had Iranian gunboats running around doing stuff in the Persian Gulf, and the 160 was with little sea bases that the Navy can set up. And but they're a national asset, right? So they're getting dragged into this for a long time. And so they weaponize these Kiowas and send them over there to essentially relieve the 160th. And then Desert Storm kicked off. So it kind of went out the window from what I understand. But yeah, no, they only use, to my knowledge, the OH-6s and the 60s and the 47s.
Wow. All right. Well, let's give you one more question, because Justin's about to head off to basic. And his question is, he's about to be a UH-60 mechanic, but he wants to be a pilot and or crew chief. How do I impress my CO enough to send me to Rucker?
I mean, just be a good dude. Like, don't try to impress people by being something you think they want you to be. Just be a hard worker and be honest and sincere in what you're doing. Obviously know the technical side of your job, right? We say be technically and tactically proficient. But just show that, because what flight school is it's just work, right? I mean, it's like going back to college on steroids type thing. You're going to be up late studying, and you're going to get up early to go to flight line. And if you can show that you can have that sort of mentality in your day job, then someone's going to back your play and vouch for you, because that's essentially what they're doing, is they're vouching for you. And I think that's just a good life lesson across the board. It really has nothing to do with flight school. It's just be a good dude and do your job, stay in your lane, help out where you can. Right? We talk about direct assistance, offer assistance in flying, but offer assistance, look for, be that guy and become that go-to guy. But don't try to be something you're not.
Awesome. Awesome. I was going to leave that there, but there was a question that reminded me of the question I asked earlier. We talked about hanging dudes off the side of the Kiowa on the skids. Did you ever do that in the Apache? That's a thing, right?
It kind of the same deal, right? So it's not a thing that you're going to purposely do as like an operation, but same deal where guys have been shot down, or you might have soldiers in a bad situation. I think there was some British soldiers, I think, that were wounded and they couldn't get them out, so they strapped them on to the Apache. But yeah, same thing that can be done. They basically sit on the wings, and there's some handholds there, and they can grab onto those, or if they've got a snap link, they can snap link in. But I mean, what a ride. I mean, you're right next to the engine, so it would be uncomfortable.
Well, hey, it's been a pleasure. I appreciate you coming on the show, on the channel. Links are in the description to find Casmo, which, by the way, why do we call you Casmo? That's all.
So yeah, so as you know, we talked about this, like the Army doesn't do call signs. We don't have like a big structure for that. Guys will pick up nicknames here and there or whatever. I had really a combination between my wife and my boss. I'm sometimes sarcastic, as you may have picked up. And so I think one night at a party, they called me Sarcasmo, the great Sarcasmo or something. And so my boss, even to this day, it's been 15, 16 years or whatever, and he'll sometimes refer to me as Sarcasmo. So I just shortened it just for fun, because you need some sort of online moniker, like Brian TV, that's not fun. So yeah, so that's where that came from. So
awesome. Well, hey, we appreciate it. Any parting shots, any words of wisdom, anything other than please go to your channel and subscribe, which the links are in the description?
Yeah, I mean, that's being obvious, right? Come subscribe and have fun with it. But more to the point, I guess, just life lesson is just kind of goes back to what we're saying. Like, if you want to fly, like, I like what you do, right? Encourage them to make them tell you no, like find that there's always loopholes. I always say, where there's a will, there's a waiver. And in some cases that's not true, but generally speaking, you can find a way around some of these rules, because some of them are just written and they're archaic and things like that. And, just try to find that positive, find that yes.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thanks so much for being on the channel. Looking forward to more stuff. This won't be it. We're going to do some probably Mover Ruins movies of Firebirds and maybe some DCS.
Yeah, let's do it.
Awesome. Awesome. Thanks so much. And thanks everybody for watching. Hope you guys have a great week. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.